The sun beat down on the dusty square of redemption, a town that had long ago forgotten its name's promise. The air, thick with the smell of horse sweat, sawdust, and desperation, shimmered above the packed earth. It was a place for men with hard faces and even harder hearts. A temporary port for the cast-offs and opportunists of the untamed West. Today, the town was hosting a grim auction, a spectacle that drew a particular kind of crowd. Amid the cacophony of barking dogs and coarse laughter, two figures stood silently, their hands bound with rough hemp rope. They were sisters Ayana and Shaya, and they were Apache. Their traditional woven dresses were stained and torn, their long black hair tangled and matted with dirt. Their faces, once vibrant with the pride of their people, were now masks of exhaustion and fear. Ayana, the older of the two at 17, held herself with a taut stillness, a silent defiance in her dark eyes. Her younger sister, Shaya, only 13, clung to her side, her small frame trembling almost imperceptibly. Their captors, a brutish pair of prospectors who had stumbled upon their isolated family camp and destroyed everything they held dear, had brought them here like spoils of war. They were here to be sold. The auctioneer, a corpulent man named Jebediah, with a voice like a bullfrog, stood on a makeshift stage of splintered planks. He leered at the crowd, then at the sisters, a disgusting grin on his face. "And now, boys, for our last lot," he bellowed, his voice amplified by the hollow space between the buildings. A fine pair of Apache fillies, fresh from the territory, strong, hardy stock. The little one's quick on her feet, and the big one's got fire in her eyes. A bargain for any rancher or houseman worth his salt. Jebediah's words cut through Ayana like a knife. He spoke of them as he would a horse or a cow, an object to be appraised and possessed. She squeezed Shaya's hand, a silent message of strength and endurance. They had promised each other they would not break, not for these men, not for anyone. They would face this horror with the same stoicism their ancestors had shown in the face of the desert sun. But inside, Ayana's heart was a hollow drum, beating a rhythm of despair. A buzz went through the crowd. Men with stained hats and calloused hands pushed forward, their eyes raking over the sisters with a brutal, dehumanizing curiosity. Bids began to fly, low and insulting at first, then growing in aggressive increments. Ayana kept her gaze fixed on the horizon, a hazy line of blue mountains in the distance, a world away from this cesspool of a town that was home. A world of red rock and whispering wind, a place of peace and spirits. It was a memory she clung to, a shield against the present. Then, a voice cut through the clamor, a voice that was calm and deep, a slow river flowing through a field of jagged rocks. $100. The town went silent. $100 was a staggering sum for two captives, more than what most of these men earned in a year. The crowd turned to see who had spoken. It was a man on the outskirts, leaning against the post of a weathered saloon. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with the lean, sun-baked physique of someone who spent his life wrestling with the land. He wore a simple denim shirt, dusty trousers, and a wide-brimmed hat that cast a deep shadow over his face. His hands, resting at his sides, were large and calloused, but they were not clenched into fists. He had a look of quiet solitude, of a man who had long preferred the company of silence to that of men. He was Silas. Jebediah's greedy eyes lit up. $100. Going once, going twice. $200. Another voice challenged. The man, a beefy rancher with a sneer. He was the kind of man who enjoyed owning things, especially things that didn't want to be owned. Silas didn't move. He simply raised his head a fraction. 250. The sneering rancher hesitated, then shook his head in disgust. No one else dared to top the bid. The sum was too high, the prize too strange. Sold. To the man in the blue shirt, Jebediah crowed, his voice filled with delight. He pointed a fat finger at Silas. Come on up, mister. They're all yours. Ayanna and Shia were pushed off the stage. Their captors, their pockets now jingling with a small fortune, grinned maliciously. One of them, a man with a missing tooth, spat on the ground. Keep M on a short leash, mister, they're wild. Silas walked over slowly. The crowd parted for him, a silent, curious wave. As he approached, Ayanna felt her heart hammer against her ribs. She braced herself, ready for the inevitable cruelty that she had learned was the only thing to expect from men like these. She met his gaze. His eyes, a surprising shade of blue-gray, were steady and held no malice, only a deep, weary sadness that seemed to mirror her own. He didn't touch them. Instead, he pulled a small, folded knife from his pocket and knelt down. He cut the ropes binding their hands, his movements careful and deliberate. When their hands were free, he stood up and looked down at them. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, Ayanna felt a flicker of hope. He wasn't looking at them with lust or greed, but with a strange, respectful quiet. He looked at Ayanna, then at Shia, who was still clutching her sister's arm, her head downcast. The town and the auctioneer and the brutal men who had sold them seemed to fade away. It was just the three of them, standing in a small circle of dust and silence. Silas took a deep breath, and his voice, when he spoke, was not a command but a simple, heartfelt statement. I'll take you home. The words hung in the air, a bell ringing in a deserted canyon. They were not what Ayanna had expected. She had steeled herself for a different kind of servitude, a different kind of pain. But home, the word was a ghost from a past life. Your home? Ayanna asked, her voice raspy from disuse. Silas shook his head. He looked past her, toward the distant mountains that were once her people's domain. No, he said softly. Not my home, your home. I'll take you there. Ayanna stared at him, unable to comprehend the meaning behind his words. She had never heard of a white man doing such a thing, of an enemy offering to return what had been stolen. She searched his face for a trick, for a hidden agenda, but found only a profound loneliness. He offered them a canteen of water, and they drank deeply, the coolness a shock to their parched throats. He led them to his horse, a sturdy bay with a gentle temperament, and helped them into the saddle. He walked beside the horse, his long strides steady and untiring, leading them away from the town, away from the dust and the men and the fear. The journey was long and silent. They rode for days, following the trail west. Silas was a man of few words, but his actions spoke volumes. He made sure they had enough water, that they were warm at night, that they were fed. He hunted for them, bringing back rabbits and squirrels, and cooked them over a small fire. He never crowded them, always keeping a respectful distance. He never asked them questions, never pressed them for their story. He just watched, a quiet sentinel, a protector they had never asked for. As the days turned into a week, Shaya's fear began to recede, replaced by a cautious trust. She started to talk, a little at first, pointing out the birds and the flowers she recognized from home. Ayana, however, remained a stone, her heart a fortress of suspicion. She had seen too much, lost too much, to believe in the kindness of a stranger, especially a white man. She watched him constantly, waiting for the moment the mask would drop, for the cruelty to reveal itself, but it never did. One evening, as they sat around the fire, Shaya fell asleep with her head on Ayana's shoulder. The moon was a silver crescent in the vast, star-strewn sky. Ayana looked at Silas, who was meticulously sharpening his knife, his face illuminated by the dancing firelight. "Why?" she finally asked, her voice a low whisper. Silas stopped his work and looked up at her. He seemed to have been expecting the question all along. "I had a family once," he said, his voice a low rumble. "A wife, a little girl. They were traveling west a year or so ago. They got caught in a snowstorm in the mountains. I found them too late." He paused, his eyes looking into the past. "I had a home waiting for them. It was a good home. I still have it, but it's empty." Ayana's heart, so long hardened, felt a fissure form. She saw the truth of his words in the depth of his eyes, in the profound ache that seemed to live in the lines of his face. He wasn't a savior, he was a survivor, just like them. He was a man with an empty home, trying to fill a void that no one could. He had bought them, not for himself, but for the ghost of a family he had lost. "We have a family," she said, her voice shaking. "We were with them. The raiders came. They took everything. I don't know if anyone else survived." Silas nodded slowly. He didn't offer empty words of comfort. He just understood. "We'll go there," he said, his voice firm. "We'll see what's left. And if there's nothing, we'll go somewhere else. We'll find a place that can be a home for you again." The final leg of the journey was marked by a tense silence. The landscape began to change, the harsh desert giving way to the familiar red rock canyons and high desert plateaus of their homeland. Ayana's heart swelled with a mixture of dread and hope. Dread of what they would find, and hope that something, anything, had survived. They found it. The old family camp, nestled in a small valley, was a wasteland of burned-out hogans and scattered possessions. The wind whistled through the charred remains, a mournful dirge. Shaya, seeing the destruction, began to weep, her small body racked with silent sobs. Ayana, numb with a pain so deep it felt like her bones were breaking, held her sister tight. She had been right all along. They had no one. Silas stood a short distance away, his hat in his hands, a silent witness to their grief. He didn't speak, didn't try to comfort them with platitudes. He just waited. After a long time, as the sun began to set, Ayana looked at him, her eyes burning with a tearless agony. "We have no home," she whispered, her voice a raw sound. "There is nothing left." Silas walked over and knelt in front of them, his calloused hands resting on his knees. "I know," he said, his voice as soft as the setting sun, "but a home is not just a place. It's a feeling. It's people. I have an empty house. It's a long way from here, but it's a good place. It has a stream and a garden. We could make it a home, a new home, for all of us." Ayana looked at Shaya, who was staring at the man with a lost, hopeful expression. She looked at Silas, this stranger who had offered them a second chance, a hand up from the abyss. She didn't trust him completely. The scars of her past were too deep for that. But she saw in him a man who was also broken, a man who, in his own way, was trying to heal, trying to find a new purpose. "What is your name?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "Silas," he said. "Silas," she repeated, the name a strange sound on her tongue. "Nah, this is Shia." He nodded, a flicker of a smile on his lips. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Ayana Shia." The journey back was different. Ayana and Shia didn't just sit on the horse, they talked. They asked Silas about his home, his ranch, his life. He told them about the cattle he raised, the stream that ran through his property, the way the stars looked at night. He spoke of his wife, Martha, and his daughter Lily, not with a crushing sadness, but with a gentle, loving memory. He had an empty home, but it was a home filled with love, a place where a new kind of family could grow. When they finally arrived at the ranch, it was everything Silas had described. A simple but sturdy log cabin stood in the middle of a wide, green valley. A stream, clear and cold, wound its way through the property. The mountains, though different from their own, stood sentinel in the distance. The house was empty, just as he had said, but it felt peaceful. In the days that followed, Ayana and Shia began to find their feet. Silas taught them how to care for the cattle, how to mend fences, and how to ride with more confidence. Ayana, with her natural strength and sharp mind, learned quickly, her movements becoming more fluid, her eyes losing their haunted look. Shia, with the easy grace of a child, found solace in the simple rhythm of the ranch. She spent her days exploring the stream, chasing the deer, and sitting on the porch, her small hands learning to weave a new basket, a skill her mother had taught her. They were still Apache. They still mourned their family. But here, with Silas, they were not just survivors. They were a part of something new. They were a family, a strange, mismatched trio of a lonely rancher and two orphaned sisters, all of them trying to make a home out of a hollow. The peace was fragile, however. One day a rider came into the valley, a man Ayana recognized instantly. It was the man with the missing tooth, one of their captors. He had tracked them, following the trail of Silas's wealth and his generosity. He and his gang had come to steal back what they considered their property, to reclaim the fortune they believed they had lost. Silas, standing on the porch, saw them first. He walked out to meet them, his movements slow and deliberate. A man moving toward a battle he had long prepared for. Ayana and Shia stood behind him, their hands linked, their hearts pounding. "Well, well, well," the man sneered, his eyes filled with a predatory hunger. "Looks like you made a mistake, Silas. These two are ours. Hand 'em over, and we'll let you live." Silas didn't flinch. "They are not yours," he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "They are free." The man laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "We'll see about that." He drew his gun, but Silas was faster. The rancher, who had seemed so gentle, so kind, was a man who knew how to defend his home. He moved with a speed and precision born of a lifetime of quiet violence. He was a hunter, and these men were the prey. The gunshots rang out, echoing in the valley, the sound a brutal punctuation to the peaceful silence of the ranch. When the dust settled, the riders were all on the ground, their forms still and lifeless. Silas stood over them, his gun still in his hand, his eyes filled with a cold, hard resolve Ayana had never seen before. He was a man who had lost his family, and he would not lose another. He was a man who had found a new purpose, a new home, and he would do anything to protect it. He looked at Ayana and Shaya, his expression softening as he holstered his gun. He walked back to them, his shoulders sagging with the weight of what he had done, but his eyes filled with a quiet strength. Ayana, seeing the raw emotion in his face, walked forward and put a hand on his arm. "They were not your fault," she whispered. Silas looked at her, then at Shaya, who was now running to his side, her small arms wrapping around his leg. He knelt down and hugged her, his large frame shaking slightly. He had been so alone for so long. He had been a man with a ghost in his house. Now, he had a family, a real family. The days that followed were filled with the quiet work of rebuilding a life. They buried the men, a grim reminder of the world they had escaped. They planted a garden, a small plot of land that was a symbol of new beginnings. Ayana began to learn English more fluently, and Silas, in turn, began to learn a few words of her language. They were bridging the gap between two worlds, two cultures, two peoples. They were building a new home. One evening, as they sat on the porch, watching the stars, Ayana looked at Silas. "Thank you," she said softly, "for bringing us home." Silas smiled, a rare, genuine smile that lit up his whole face. He put an arm around Shaya, who was half asleep on his lap, and looked at Ayana, a silent promise in his eyes. He had bought them like cattle, but he had given them a home. He had saved them, and in doing so, they had saved him. They had filled his empty house, and in its place, they had built a family. The word home no longer felt like a ghost. It felt like a reality. It felt like love.